today's terrifying review, we're going to be having a look at the McFarlane Toys Tortured Souls Series 1. This is the 12-inch Venal Anatomica. According to the packaging, McFarlane claims that this guy is 12 inches tall. I don't believe it. He looks a lot taller than 12 inches. So to prove it, I got my little tape measure here. This is 12 inches right here. That's a foot. We're going to put that right next to him. Just make sure it's... see if I can actually lock it. Oh, this one I can't lock. The tape measure actually goes to about his shoulders if you're looking at 12 inches in height. We extend the tape measure a little bit further. You can clearly see that Venal Anatomica is closer to about 13.5 inches. Oh, closer, maybe about 13.5 inches total in height. To also show you how tall he is, here is the regular Venal Anatomica that we've looked at in a previous video. And there he is next to the taller version of himself. Now once again, we grab the tape measure. This one here was about 7 inches in height, if you remember correctly. Now double him. You can see, yeah, that's closer to about the height that this particular figure really is. I don't even know why they would have advertised him at 12 inches. Now, at first glance, these two figures look like they would be carbon copies to one another. One is simply just taller than the other, but that actually is not true at all. There are some real noticeable differences between the smaller and the taller Venal Anatomica. We just spin the figure around to the side. And one thing that you'll notice on the smaller version of him was that he had multiple chains actually coming from his belt. He had two of them. He had one hook, and then he had one kind of like a spiked little blade, little spiked part that's coming up from the chain itself. This chain is completely something different, so we'll look at that in a second. But he does have two of them here. The taller version of himself, let me just show you here, actually only has one chain, one hooked chain. Granted, yes, splattered in blood, but it actually only has the one rather than the two. Now this one also is looped. As you can see right there, it's chained on the belt portion, whereas the larger version of himself has the chain wrapped well, not all the way around his waist. It connects only to the sides here, but it definitely doesn't come from the center like the smaller one does. I do think that the added blood to this one actually does add a little extra oomph to the character. One of the things also that this figure has, if we spin it around, is that he's got three chains actually on his arm. The smaller one, and I know a lot of this is going to be comparisons, but the smaller one only has one chain, which is the ball end chain, which is coming out from his arm. This one here has multiples. He has the ball and chain, but then he also has that same thing that was absent in the middle skirt. Actually, he has it on his forearm, and then he's also got like a standalone chain here. Now, I think this standalone chain is actually supposed to, let me just grab onto it, and I'll just move this guy out of the way for a second. I think this one actually was supposed to link onto the little nail that's on the top of his head. That's not accurate to the other one, but I think it's supposed to loop itself on like so. The reason why I say that is this one here has the chain from the nail, but the nail actually goes to a pair of bare sleeves, bare arms, and it's hooked to the side of his shoulder. Whereas this one here, he's got a shoulder guard. Very strange how they've changed it ever so slightly, because like things such as the face are fairly consistent with one another, though I think the face sculpt is a lot better honestly on the smaller one than on the larger one. They also both have the little domes, which to the testament of the larger one has some additional shading here in these little areas, whereas the smaller one didn't have that. You can go ahead and take the top portion dome off and try our best not to drop it. I'm going to just unattach it, detach it from the chain. We'll go ahead and take the smaller one off, which this one's a little more difficult to take off. And there's the differencing between the two. The details are a little bit more refined on the taller one, where you can see very clearly the more darker eyes that the smaller one doesn't have. The smaller one does have some additional shading, but the brain aspect of it, the visible brain, is a lot more detailed here on the 12-inch, 13.5-inch version of Venal Anatomica versus the smaller one. The smaller one had the details there of the brain, but very, very subtle, and actually a lot less of it was visible, whereas this one here is very clearly ripped away and opened up. You can see the brain here. I think that the face, sculpt-wise, I think the face looks better on the taller one than on the smaller one, but I almost dare say that the coloring, I think the coloring still looks better on the smaller one. Although, to be fair though, the larger one does have more separations in color. You've got the more clearer, easier to read beige, like that flesh tone, and then you've got the red and then the more recessed areas of the eyes. Whereas this is kind of more one singular color. It's multiple colors, but it kind of just blends together in a more just muddy wash. So I might take that back. I think the larger one does have definitely a better face sculpt, and I think better face paint as well. Looking at the two arms, it still has the blade that sticks out, protruding out from the side. Much more bloodied also as well can be given to the taller version than the smaller one here. This side of his body looks like it's pretty consistent with one another. It doesn't look like they've changed all that much. Whereas, of course, this one here, of course, as we've discussed already, he had the bare arm versus up here has the shoulder, kind of shoulder guard covering over top of it. I suppose while we're awarding points for the taller one does definitely have a better looking sculpted torso. Torso doesn't really look different from the tall to the small, but the torso painted looks much nicer on the taller one, where you've got just more grotesque looking stitched up job, whereas this one here has doesn't have as much the blood. This one looks like it was just recently done. This one looks like it would have been like healed over a course of time. The fabrics materials are looking like they're almost identical. Even like the leg portions look like they are similar to one another, complete with these spikes sticking out from the sides of the thigh as well. Here's some comparisons between the backs on the small and the tall version. I know most of this review may seem like a comparison, because really a lot of the times when you get a scaled up version of a figure, generally it's all pretty much the exact same mold. They don't really do all that much different to it. In, I would say, 3/4 of the instances here, the taller Venal Anatomica seems to be exactly the same as its smaller counterpart, but then so drastically changes in areas such as the arm here, where you've got the extra chains and the hook here. Speaking of hooks, by the way, the hooks look like they are identical to one another. Other than the fact that the larger one has a little bit extra paint, the smaller one couldn't afford. But it doesn't look like there's all that much different between the two. I guess really looking at all the elements to both of them, the only thing that's really different, I suppose, is between them is the additional shoulder guard, the shoulder fabric that's coming over the one shoulder area, and then just where they placed the chains. The chains vary a little bit on the front skirt and as well on the arms here. Let me just say one thing though about the 12-inch Venal Anatomica is he really has a tough time standing. In fact, let me just turn him sideways so you can see what's happening here. I don't know if it's just the skirt, but it seems like he's off balanced. You can see right away there's this gap that forms underneath here, right underneath his foot here, and he just wants to topple himself over. I found a lot of times I had to kind of keep leaning him forward for him to properly stand. Now granted, that ends up making him a little bit off posed. It just looks a little off, a little disjointed, him leaning forward the way the smaller one had the same problem. but I didn't have nearly as much the issue because he was a smaller figure. He had a little less plastic and weight to him. The taller one definitely has a bigger problem standing. And this is actually a couple of efforts of shooting this review, because while I was reviewing this guy, he kept basically falling over and landing on the backdrop. He just kept toppling over. This right here is about as accurately straight as I can get him. If I tilt his legs any further back, and granted his feet are flat, minus of the heel that he's got, he's prone to just wanting to topple over. He doesn't have any peg holes on the undersides of his feet, so unfortunately he doesn't have, like if you had a stand, not nearly, I'm sure, to this size. Even still, you can see, yeah, he's going to fall over at any time now. When it comes to his posability, it's about the same as the smaller version, so he's only got really a swivel in the head. He's got swiveled arms, a little swivel at the bicep area, nothing in the hand. On this side, he's got a swivel in the mid forearm and up at the bicep. So this side only has what looks to be a single swivel here. This one has two. Why? I have absolutely no idea. That's just what McFarlane does. Nothing in the waist, and the legs, that's about all you can really do with them. They are angled in such a way that the articulation is cut. The legs obviously are prone to hinging outward instead of forward and back. Again, you got lots of cool details here that look a little bit more predominant on the 12-inch variety of this guy. But again, standing this guy can be a little bit more tricky. What this guy definitely has going for him is his size. If you are a fan of Tortured Souls and want something that looks a little bit more predominant on a shelf, then the 12-inch is the way to go. He has basically all the same details that the smaller one had. The placement of chains is a slight bit different on this one than on the smaller one, but you pretty much get the same sort of feel with this Venal Anatomica that you did with a smaller release. The only thing I would say as a nitpick to this one, size isn't so much the issue, even though the 12 inches, there's no way this guy is 12 inch tall, but he does stand badly. In fact, I'm even surprised that I'm being able to get him stand currently as he's being rotated on my turntable. I'm surprised he actually hasn't fallen over, and I'm sure I've just jinxed it by saying that. But if standing is a concern for you, don't put this guy on a shelf where, you know, if he has something at least to lean back against, all the better. This is not a guy that you would want to be putting on his own, maybe on a free-floating, you know, one of those hovering shelving. You definitely want to put him on something like that. That sort of shelving, he's going to probably topple over. I definitely would have him leaning against something, all the more better. Or definitely don't put this guy on some place where there's nothing behind him to hold him up, because guaranteed at some point this guy is going to topple over. Standing is a big problem for him, but I do dig the fact that he is a taller figure. And I think there were actually other released 12-inch Tortured Souls figures of this size. I may pick up some other ones as well, but in the meantime, I certainly want to have a look at one of the taller ones and show you guys a comparison between how he stacks up versus his smaller counterpart. Today's spookerific review, we were having a look at the McFarlane toys. This was the Tortured Souls Series 1, and this was the 12-inch, which really actually wasn't 12 inches, but we were looking at the 12-inch Venal Anatomica. Basically the smaller guy we already looked at, just a little bit taller. If you guys like this video, certainly hit it with a like, and if you haven't had a chance to subscribe to this channel, make sure you hit that little subscribe button down below. More videos will be heading your way as we gear ourselves up, set ourselves up for Halloween. It's right around the corner. I'm very excited for that. We'll try to do a couple more spooky videos before that time is up. As always, guys, thanks for watching as you always do. I'll see you next time.